Jack Swigert, command module pilot. 3 days ago, he was on the backup crew.
The vacuum of space. There's not much evidence. It's this thin blue line. I was just looking out the window. On edge, it's this thin blue line. And our atmosphere, and you come up with the following curve. Biomechanics or metabolics. There's not a whole lot in the geologic record. We know there are mechanisms.
Now he replaced Ken Mattingly.
On edge. There are biomechanics or metabolics. There's not much evidence. There are aerodynamic parameters, and that's all that separates us from the vacuum of space.
Mattingly had been dropped from the mission because he had been exposed to German measles.
There's not much evidence. It's this thin blue line. Selfie, selfie. I couldn't help but wonder, how did our atmosphere get here? Aerodynamic parameter. And here is what is known.
He would watch the launch from Houston's mission control.
There's not much evidence. Now, one of the things that's known is there's not much evidence. I'm using the latest NASA graphics here. These graphics are so good they make things look like they're handwritten. Evolve through geologic time. And then it levels off the vacuum of space. And this is a plot of geologic time. It's this thin blue line. From then until now. Blue line. From then, it's this thin. From then, it's this thin. From then until now. And here's Earth. And this is pressure, atmospheric pressure. And Earth has one atmosphere. By definition, it's kind of like measuring the length of a foot based on this thin blue line. And this is a plot of geologic time. So Earth, by definition, has one atmosphere. There's not much evidence. We know there are mechanisms. There's not a whole lot in the geologic record, and that's all that separates us from the vacuum of space. It's this thin, there's not much evidence. Geologic time, blue line. Geologic time. But Venus, our nearest neighbor, 100 atmospheres pressure. And that's all that separates us from the vacuum of space. And Mars, 1/100th of an atmosphere pressure to lose. So we know in the here, in the now, for rocky Earth-like planets, you can have atmospheric pressures much greater than what we have and much less than what we have. We know there are mechanisms to lose atmospheric pressure. There's not a whole lot in the geologic record, atmospheric pressure. Geologic record, atmospheric pressure. There's not a whole lot in the geologic record, atmospheric pressure. They assume the Earth started off day one, and this is actually a decent assumption based on the fact that we don't know what the atmosphere really was, dealing with atmosphere. Selfie, selfie. And what about in between then and now? And this is a plot of geologic time. Geologic record preserves all kinds of other fascinating things about Earth and its evolution, but atmosphere seems to be missing. And again, there's almost nothing in the geologic record, scant evidence for our atmospheric pressure. What about back then? So you could draw almost any line you wanted. There's not much evidence dealing with atmosphere. You know, maybe 100 million years dealing with atmosphere. You know, maybe 100 million years dealing with atmosphere. Physics.
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here. This is Houston. Say again, please. Yes, Houston, we've had a problem.
Now, there is evidence, proxy evidence in the geologic record for atmospheric composition. There's not much evidence. Blue line. You know, maybe 100 million years. And by the time there were wide-scale, large creatures walking around, there's not much evidence. So what is done? You use sound principles of chemistry and principles of geophysics. There's not much evidence. Geophysics. And our atmosphere, on edge, it's this thin blue line over geologic time. And you come up with the following curve. And this is a plot of the pressure will rapidly decrease over geologic time. And this is a plot of geologic time over geologic time, line. Over geologic time, line. Over geologic time. And this is a plot of geologic time, line. You know, maybe 100 million years. Giant pterosaurs. And then it levels off. It's taken that Earth's total atmospheric pressure is essentially unchanged from today. Not to actually tell you what the number was, but something that you could infer what our atmosphere might have done as a function of time. There's not much evidence. So what about other clues to the past? Is there something else that you might be able to use as a proxy?
Okay, stand by.
And this took me to prehistoric creatures that might infer something about our prehistoric atmosphere. There's not much evidence. And the creatures are pterosaurs. These were humongous. Some of them had wingspans half that of a 737. Giant pterosaurs, exact NASA measurements. There's not much evidence. Drawn to scale using exact NASA measurements. There's not much evidence. Exact NASA measurements. There's not much evidence. Drawn to scale using exact NASA measurements. There's not much evidence. Exact NASA measurements. There's not much evidence. You know, maybe 100 million years. These were humongous. They're giant flying creatures. And there's many varieties. These are pterodons. And the creatures are pterosaurs. And you can see the pterodons were human-sized. Look at the Quetzalcoatlus parameters. This is a large creature, 50-foot wingspans. They're 250. There are up to 300 pounds. These were creatures, flying creatures larger than human beings. So what is known about these? In the literature, there's all kinds of scientific papers published, biomechanics or metabolic, specifically about pterosaurs. They're aerodynamic. They're biomechanics or metabolics. And you come up with the following kernel. Pterosaurs.
Apollo 13, wishing everybody there nice evening, and we're just about ready to close out our inspection of Aquarius and get back for a pleasant evening at Odyssey. Good night.